before I tell you about the end of the world, before I speak of angels and demons, of falling stars and rising empires, I have to confess something. I am not a holy man. I was never a prophet chosen from the womb. The truth is, I was a monster, a man whose heart was calloused by hatred, whose hands were stained by violence. And this story, this grand, terrible story that will reshape everything you think you know about hope and despair, it didn't begin on some sacred, cloud-wreathed mountain. No, it began in the deepest, hottest, most forgotten corner of the earth, the bottom of a Roman salt mine. They say the visions of the end will come in thunder and in fire, but that's not the whole truth. Not for me, anyway. The truth I witnessed. It was quieter, more personal, and in its own way, far more terrifying. It seeps into your mind like a whisper in a heat stroke, and by the time you realize it's there, it has already become a part of you. And the ending, I promise you, the ending is not what you think. So, before we step into the darkness of that mind together, I want to know who you are. Tell me, where in this wide world are you listening from? And in your corner of the globe, what time is it? Leave me a comment below. Let me know I'm not alone on this journey. Now, let us begin. The salt mines of Sardinia. Even the name felt like a curse on the tongue. To the Roman Empire, it was a mine of white gold. To prisoners like us, it was a tomb without a headstone. The sun there was not a source of life. It was a tyrannical warden, a blistering anvil of brass hanging in a bleached white sky. Every day it leached the life from our bodies, leaving behind desiccated husks moving in a slow, agonizing dance of futility. The air was thick, heavy with the acrid tang of salt and sweat, the very taste of slow decay. It clung to your skin, worked its way into every lash mark and open sore, and burned your lungs with every breath. My name is Kaelan. I was once a zealot, a freedom fighter, or so I told myself. I fought Rome with a fanatic's fire in my heart, convinced that violence was the only language our oppressors understood. I had seen and I had done things a man should not see or do, but our rebellion was crushed, drowned in blood and failure. My fire had guttered out, leaving only the cold ash of guilt and a bitterness that never seemed to fade. They didn't kill me. They sent me here. A quick death, they knew, was a mercy. In the salt mines, you died 1,000 times before your heart finally gave out. My life became a featureless loop of misery. Wake in the suffocating dark, choke down a piece of bread as hard as stone, and trudge into the bowels of the earth with a pickaxe. We would chip away at the crystalline walls, the salt glittering like diamonds, mocking our squalor. Then we would trudge back to our hovels as the darkness swallowed the day. Each day was a perfect copy of the last and a perfect promise of the next. In this purgatory there was a single flickering point of light. His name was Linus. A boy, really, little more than a youth, thin and wiry, with eyes as clear as a morning sky, a thing unheard of in that place. He had been sent here for a crime even more ridiculous than my treason. He believed in a carpenter who had died on a cross. A king, he called him, whose kingdom was not of this world. In a place where faith was the most dangerous luxury, Linus wore his like a second skin, guileless and unafraid. He would share his meager bread ration with me when I collapsed from exhaustion. He would clean my wounds with the one strip of clean cloth he owned. And I, Kaelan, who had once killed men without a second thought, found myself possessed by a fierce, unfamiliar urge to protect this fragile innocence. He was a small candle in a hurricane, and I, almost against my will, had become the cupped hands shielding its flame. And that is when it began, not with the blast of a celestial trumpet, but with a whisper. At first, I was certain it was the heat. The Sardinian sun could bend reality, painting shimmering mirages on the superheated air. I started hearing things. Fragments of conversations with no speakers, the sound of running water where there was only dust. Then came the images flashing behind my closed, burning eyelids, a candle being snuffed out by an unseen breath, a heavy door slamming shut, a hand laden with gold rings trembling uncontrollably. I fought it. I tried to dismiss it. "You're losing your mind, Kaelan," I'd tell myself, my voice a dry rasp. "The salt has seeped into your brain." I clung to the hard reality of my pickaxe, the ache in my back, the sting of the overseer's whip, anything as long as it was real. But the whispers persisted. They grew clearer, as if someone were speaking directly into my ear, yet no one else could hear. One night, lying on the cold, packed earth of my cell, feverish and exhausted, a voice echoed in the cavern of my skull. It was not my own. It was a voice that was at once ancient and immediate, a voice of immense power, yet laced with an equally immense sorrow. "Kaelan," it said, calling me by name, "what your eyes see is only ash. Let me show you the fire." And just like that, the walls of my cell dissolved. The salt mine vanished. I was no longer in my body. I was floating in a formless void, and before me 7 colossal mirrors materialized, each one shining with an internal light. They did not reflect my image. They reflected the soul of humanity. The first mirror showed a bustling seaside community, their hands calloused and strong. They built, they toiled, they endured. But as I looked into their eyes, I saw a chilling emptiness. They performed their duties with flawless precision, but the original fire, the passion, the love that had once driven them was gone. They were a perfect machine running without a soul. A shudder went through me, for in them I saw myself. The holy fire of my zealot cause had long ago been replaced by the cold, mechanical habit of hatred. The second mirror revealed a city on a hill, opulent and prosperous. Its streets were marble, its citizens draped in silk. But as I looked closer, I saw that they were ghosts. They laughed and feasted, but their eyes were dead. They had traded their spirit for comfort, their truth for wealth. They possessed everything, and they had nothing. Horror coiled in my gut as I remembered the villages my comrades and I had plundered, justifying our greed as the spoils of war. The third mirror, the fourth. Each one was a scalpel cutting into my own past. I saw a community that tolerated lies to avoid conflict, another that was persecuted but remained fiercely loyal, and in their faces I saw the face of Linus, and another still, a community that was neither hot nor cold, just lukewarm, content and complacent in its own mediocrity. The voice returned, its sorrow palpable. "Do you see, Kaelan? This is not their story. This is the story of you all, of the choices you make in the quiet of your own hearts." The revelation was not a judgment handed down from on high. It was a confrontation, a mercilessly accurate diagnosis of the sickness rotting the heart of the world. And in every symptom, I saw a piece of myself. The pride, the greed, the cowardice, the apathy. I was not an observer, I was a part of the disease. When I came back to myself, back to the gritty reality of the salt mine, tears were tracing clean paths through the grime on my face, stinging as they mixed with the salt. Linus was crouched beside me, his brow furrowed with concern. "What is it, Kaelan? Was it a bad dream?" I looked at the boy, at his clear, untroubled eyes, and for the first time in years, I had no words. What could I possibly say? That I had just seen the soul of the world dying, and that I was one of its cancers? I just shook my head. "It was nothing, kid, just a long dream." But I knew it wasn't a dream, it was a beginning, and the worst was yet to come. In the days that followed, the visions came with increasing frequency and terrifying clarity. They were no longer fleeting images, but vivid, sprawling epics. One night, as a fever racked my body, I felt myself being lifted, pulled up through the flimsy roof of my hovel, up through the star-dusted Sardinian sky. I soared past the clouds, beyond the moon, until the universe itself was a swirl of distant light below me. I had come to a place beyond place. Before me was a throne, not of gold or silver, but seemingly woven from pure, unadulterated light. It radiated an energy so holy that every dark thought, every sin and shadow within me felt exposed and utterly alien. Surrounding it were 24 lesser thrones, upon which sat elders in robes of brilliant white, their faces etched with the wisdom of ages. And at the center of it all, 4 strange, wondrous living creatures sang a ceaseless, simple anthem that shook the foundations of existence. Holy, holy, holy. I, Kaelan, a filthy prisoner, a murderer, stood in the midst of this cosmic majesty and felt as insignificant as a single grain of salt. And then I saw it. In the hand of the one who sat on the throne was an ancient scroll, sealed shut with 7 wax seals. I knew with a certainty that bypassed all reason that this scroll contained the entire story of humankind. Every war, every act of love, every discovery, every betrayal. It was the script of destiny itself. A mighty voice, like the roar of a great waterfall, boomed through the silence. Who is worthy to open the scroll and to break its seals? A profound hush fell, a silence heavier and more absolute than any sound. I looked around. The elders bowed their heads. The 4 living creatures fell silent. All of heaven held its breath, and no one moved, not one being, not an archangel, not a patriarch, not one soul in all of creation dared to step forward. And then a despair, deeper and more vast than anything I had felt in the mind, seized me. I began to weep, not the selfish tears of my own misery, but tears for all of humanity. I wept for our utter, hopeless inadequacy. We had authored a story of such pain and sorrow, and now not a single one of us was good enough, pure enough, to even read the ending, to find its meaning. We were trapped in our own tragedy, all the suffering, all the sacrifice, even the quiet faith of boys like Linus would amount to nothing. "Do not weep," one of the elders said, his voice gentle. "Behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has prevailed to open the scroll." I wiped my eyes and looked toward the throne, expecting to see a great roaring lion or a conquering king. Instead, I saw a lamb, a small white lamb, and on its neck was a deep crimson scar, as if it had been slain for a sacrifice. It stood not in the strength of dominance, but in the power of that sacrifice. Its beauty was not in its perfection, but in the very scars it bore. The lamb moved slowly, and in the reverent silence of the cosmos, it took the scroll from the hand of the one on the throne. Instantly, a symphony of joy and relief erupted. The 24 elders fell on their faces. Millions upon millions of angels burst into song. They sang not of great battles or mighty deeds, but of the Lamb that was slain, of a love that paid the ultimate price, of a sacrifice that had conquered all. Hope had returned, not a cheap, easy hope, but a hope bought with a terrible cost. And I knew as those seals were broken that our story would no longer be a meaningless tragedy, but the price of seeing it through to the end would be more terrible than I could have ever imagined. The Lamb broke the first seal. There was no great cataclysm, just a subtle shift in the fabric of reality. Out of the ether emerged a rider on a magnificent white horse. He carried no sword. He wore a charming smile and a victor's laurel wreath. He was the peacemaker. He spoke of unity, of erasing borders, of a world without conflict. He promised a new order, a peace built on compromise and consensus. And the world, weary of strife, cheered for him. They gave him their power. They believed his promises, never realizing the peace he offered was the peace of apathy, the peace that comes from abandoning truth for the sake of quiet. The second seal was broken. A horse the color of blood appeared. Its rider was not a great general. He was the divider. He carried not a great sword, but a small, sharp wedge. He slipped between families, between friends, between communities. He whispered doubts, stoked old fears, and chiseled small differences into uncrossable chasms. Father against son, neighbor against neighbor. People built invisible walls, imprisoning themselves in fortresses of their own loneliness. There was no great battle, yet the world was plunged into a silent civil war of the soul. The third seal, a black horse. Its rider, the appraiser, held a set of scales. He didn't cause famine by destroying crops. He did it by putting a price on everything. A day's wages for a loaf of bread, a silver coin for a drink of clean water. But worse, he began to assign value to the invaluable. Loyalty, love, human dignity. Everything became a commodity to be bought and sold. The world became a vast marketplace where the spiritually destitute sold the last fragments of themselves just to survive. And then the fourth seal was broken. A pale, ashen horse emerged. Its rider had no name. He was simply the emptiness. He didn't have to kill anyone. He merely followed the other three, harvesting the souls that had been numbed by the false peace, isolated by the division, and hollowed out by the commodification of their own spirit. Death was no longer a tragedy. It was a welcome release. These visions burned in my mind. This was not destruction from without. This was an autoimmune disease of the spirit. We were doing this to ourselves. The world outside my visions was descending into a carefully orchestrated chaos, and from the heart of that storm, a man emerged. He didn't rise from a battlefield or a coup. He stepped out of boardrooms and off global stages. He wasn't a snarling tyrant with fire in his eyes. He was a genius, a brilliant orator, a visionary. They called him the architect. He dressed in simple, elegant clothes. He spoke calmly, rationally. He didn't shout slogans. He presented plans, charts, solutions. Division is the enemy, he'd say. Inefficiency is the crime. We need a system, a single, intelligent, global system that connects us all, ensures no one is left behind, that there will be no more war, no more famine. And at his side, always, was another figure, a master of communication, a man who could distill the most complex ideas into simple, powerful, emotional messages. This communicator used every screen, every platform, to amplify the architect's image. He staged miracles of technology, medical breakthroughs, clean energy solutions. The world was captivated. They were so tired of the chaos. They craved order, a shepherd, and the architect, with his confident smile and promises of a perfect future, became their savior. He didn't have to conquer the world. The world laid itself at his feet. The architect's system spread like an invisible net, blanketing the planet. Logistics, trade, energy, information, everything was optimized. Efficiency and order reigned, but it came at a price no one spoke of. Then, one day, the architect appeared on every screen in the world. "Citizens of a united world," he began, his voice a calm and reassuring hum. "We have achieved the impossible, but threats remain. Instability, a lack of transparency, radical elements. To protect the peace we have so painstakingly built, to ensure the safety and prosperity of all, we need one final step, a leap of faith." He held up his hand. "We are introducing the mark, a simple, secure biometric identifier. It will be seamlessly integrated, painless, and it will replace all currency, all identification, all keys. It is your ticket to a future free from worry. No more crime, no more fraud, no more fear." The communicator followed, his voice electric with enthusiasm. "This is not control, this is liberation. Freedom from the burden of wallets and passwords and anxieties. This is the mark of belonging, of solidarity." My vision snapped. I was no longer in the heavens. I was back in the salt mine. But it was different. Roman soldiers, their armor polished, marched into our compound. They carried no whips. They carried small metallic cases and scrolls. A centurion stepped forward, his voice devoid of menace. "Laborers of Sardinia," he announced, "the empire has changed. A new order is here. Today is the day of your freedom." A stunned silence fell. "Freedom." "That's right," the centurion smiled. You will be freed, given food, housing, and a place in the new society. There is only one condition. He opened one of the cases. Inside was a small, needle-like device. You must receive the mark. It is the proof of your compliance, the sign that you are part of the new, unified world. A murmur rippled through the prisoners. Men who had lost all hope looked at each other, their eyes wide. Freedom, food, a life, for the price of a small sting. One by one, then in groups, they began to step forward. I felt a small hand tugging at my ragged tunic. It was Linus. He was trembling, but in his clear eyes there was no fear. There was a terrifying certainty. "Kaelan," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "They call it the mark of compliance, but compliance with what?" I looked at the centurion. He was staring directly at us, the only two who hadn't moved. His smile faded, replaced by a cold, clinical expression. "The choice is simple," he said, his voice low but carrying. "Belong or don't exist. Cooperate or be rendered obsolete. The system has no room for anomalies." And I understood. It wasn't a physical mark, it was a spiritual contract. The price wasn't a pinprick. The price was your right to believe in something else. Your right to hope for a king whose kingdom was not of this world. Your right to be an anomaly. The cosmic war between good and evil, between angels and demons, had been distilled into this single moment, in a filthy salt mine, between a guilty old soldier and an innocent boy. I looked at Linus, then back at the centurion. My entire life, every choice, every sin had led me here. I could choose survival, comfort, the freedom of the system, or I could choose to stand with the small, trembling, but unyielding flame beside me. I pulled Linus behind me. "We refuse," I said, my voice hoarse but firm. The centurion's lip curled into a sneer. "Your choice." He gestured, and two guards seized us. They didn't lead us to the gate of freedom. They dragged us toward a deeper, darker part of the mine, a place of isolation from which no one returned. The vision dissolved, but the horror remained. I had seen my choice, but I had also seen the world's choice, and its consequence was absolute. Outside the mine, the world embraced the mark. Civilization reached a pinnacle of convenience, but then the cracks began to show, not in the earth, but in the soul. My vision resumed its nightmarish reel. I saw the people who bore the mark. On the surface, they were fine, but a strange malady began to spread. Ugly, weeping sores appeared on their skin. The architect's best doctors were baffled. They didn't understand that this wasn't a disease of the body. It was their apathy made manifest. Their hearts had grown so numb that their very flesh had begun to rot. I saw the rivers and the seas. The water, the symbol of life and purification, turned a brackish, syrupy red. It was undrinkable, but it wasn't literal blood. It was the symbol of a poisoned truth. Every source of information, every conversation, had become so contaminated with the system's propaganda that nothing pure remained. The air grew thick and suffocating, not from pollution, but from the lack of genuine speech. People no longer talked to each other. They recited programmed slogans at each other. The silence was even worse, the silence of minds that had forgotten how to ask questions. And then I saw Babylon, the capital of the system, a glittering megacity, a 24-hour spectacle where entertainment and commerce had become religion. Towers of glass scraped the sky, holographic advertisements danced in the air, and rivers of people flowed in a constant, restless pursuit of the next gratification. Babylon was the crowning achievement of the architect's new world. It was the symbol of his victory over chaos. And in a single night, it fell. No bomb was dropped. No army invaded. It imploded. The global market evaporated into thin air. The information network that held everything together suffered a catastrophic, cascading failure. The supply chains snapped. The brilliant neon lights flickered and died, plunging the city into an abyssal darkness. The great glass towers stood as silent, empty monoliths, giant tombstones for a civilization that had died of its own success. In my vision, I saw the world's kings and merchants, the men who had grown rich off Babylon's system, watching from a distance and weeping. "Alas, alas, that great city Babylon," they cried, "for in 1 hour your great riches have come to nothing." They weren't weeping for the people, they were weeping for their portfolios. The rot was complete. The promise of order had led to the most total form of annihilation, and from the ashes the architect's rage was born. He could not accept failure. His perfect system, his brainchild, was in ruins, and in the narcissistic fury of a wounded god, he found his scapegoat, the ones who had refused the mark, the anomalies, the outsiders, people like me and Linus. On the few screens still working, the architect's face appeared, no longer calm, but twisted in a mask of fury. "It was them," he shrieked, "the stubborn, selfish few who refused to join us. They are the disease that has corrupted our unity. We must purge them to rebuild. We will march on the valley of Megiddo. We will crush this final pocket of resistance and cleanse the world." My vision swept me to that valley, the place men called Armageddon. But what I saw was not a battle of titans. It was a gathering of the damned. Millions of people, the last remnants of the architect's army, assembled. They held their weapons not with confidence, but with a desperate fear. They fought not for a cause, but because there was nowhere else to go. They were an army of the spiritually dead, led by a madman. Facing them across the valley was no army at all, just a small, huddled group of refugees who had escaped the collapse, thin and ragged, but with a defiant flicker of hope still alive in their eyes. The architect stood on a precipice, ready to give the final command. He raised his hand. The world held its breath. And then it happened. The sky did not tear open with lightning. No avenging angels descended with flaming swords. Instead, a light began to dawn on the horizon. Not the harsh light of the sun or an explosion. It was a gentle, warm light, like the very first sunrise after an endless night. The light spread, touching everything, and as it washed over the architect's army, something extraordinary occurred. They weren't burned. They weren't struck down. They simply stopped. The lies they had believed, the fears that had driven them, the masks they had worn, all of it dissolved in the pure, clarifying light of truth. They looked down at their own hands, then at each other, and for the first time in a long, long time, they saw clearly. They saw the emptiness of the system they had served. They saw the madness of the leader they had worshipped. The architect screamed orders, threats, promises, but no one was listening anymore. The light had exposed him for what he was, not a savior, but a small, naked, pathetic man, impotent in his rage. His entire empire, his entire system, had been defeated not by a battle, but by a sunrise. The greatest war in history was over without a single blow. It was ended by an awakening. That light washed over me. It was no longer a vision. It was real. I no longer felt the cold stone floor of the isolation cell. I no longer heard the guard's footsteps. Every ache, every sin, every burden I had ever carried seemed to be lifted, cleansed away. And then I found myself standing in a field of green grass. The sky was a shade of blue I had never seen, deep and utterly serene. The air was sweet and clean. In the distance I saw a city. It wasn't built of stone or brick. It was built of light itself, its walls as clear as crystal, and its streets shimmering as if paved with gold. This was the New Jerusalem, but it wasn't just a place, it was a state of being, a reality where there were no salt mines, no whips, no fear, a place where every imperfection had been made perfect. I walked toward the city, my heart pounding with a joy so intense it was almost painful. I saw a river of life, its water sparkling and pure, flowing from the city's center. On its banks grew the tree of life, its branches heavy with fruit that I knew could heal any wound of the body or the soul. I saw the faces of those I had known in the visions, the faithful ones, the martyrs, but I was looking for one face, only one. And then I saw him, Linus. He was no longer a thin, ragged boy. He was dressed in a robe of pure white, and on his face was a smile of such radiant joy that it could outshine the sun. He was standing at the city gate, and he was waiting for me. I ran to him, and for the first time in my life, I felt no shame in my tears. Linus was all I could manage to say. He embraced me. "I knew you would make it, Kaelan," he said. "I always knew." One of the elders I had seen in my first vision of the throne room approached us. He held a large, ancient-looking book. "Here," he said, offering it to me, "the Book of Life." With trembling hands, I opened it. I had expected a ledger of sins, a list of judgments, but it wasn't. Inside, there were no condemnations. There were stories, small, simple stories. I saw an entry detailing the moment Linus had shared his bread with me, another that recorded a mother in a distant land humming a lullaby to her child in the midst of chaos, another that noted the silent prayer of a soldier for his enemy. The Book of Life was not an indictment. It was a journal of every small act of love, every flicker of hope throughout the entire, long, painful history of humankind. And I finally understood. Heaven wasn't a reward for being perfect. It was a home for those who, in their imperfection, never stopped trying to love. A warm voice, the one that had whispered to me in the mine, now resonated throughout the city, filled with a triumphant tenderness. "Behold," it declared, "I will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away." And I felt an invisible hand, gentle as a feather, brush away the last tears from my face. Every burden, every sin, every scar from the salt mine and the zealot's life, it all dissolved, not erased, but healed. I saw the beginning and the end of the universe. I watched the rise and fall of the greatest systems imaginable. But the lesson I brought back, the one essential truth I learned from it all, was so incredibly simple, that even in the deepest darkness, even at the bottom of a salt mine of despair, one small act of hope, one quiet prayer for the person next to you, one choice to refuse an easy compliance in favor of a fragile belief, has enough power to light up a galaxy. It has enough power to be written into the great journal of the cosmos. That whisper in the mine, it never left me. And it is still speaking now, even in your world, amidst the noise of your information and the promises of your own perfect systems. The whisper is still there. The final question isn't whether the end is coming. The real question is, are you listening? On our channel, we believe that every story, every life, no matter how ordinary it may seem, contains a universe of meaning and profound lessons. If you believe that too, if Kaelan's journey has resonated with you, then become a part of this community. Hit that subscribe button, and together we will continue to explore the stories that have the power to change the way we see the world. Thank you for listening.